World News in 5.
Right now.
News and developments making headlines around the world in 5 minutes. World News in 5. Here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service.
Good day to all of our listeners here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service. This is World News in 5 and I'm your host, Steph Vicente. United States President Donald Trump has triggered a diplomatic dispute with Denmark after appointing a special envoy to Greenland, an Arctic territory he has previously said he wants the U.S. to annex. The BBC reports President Trump announced that Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry will serve as the U.S. Special Envoy to Greenland. Governor Landry later said it was an honor to take on the role, describing it as a volunteer position. Denmark reacted strongly, saying it would summon the U.S. ambassador for an explanation. It is noted that Greenland's Prime Minister stressed that the island will decide its own future and that its territorial integrity must be respected. Since returning to the White House in January, President Trump has renewed his interest in Greenland, citing its strategic location and mineral resources. He has also refused to rule out the use of force, a stance that has alarmed Denmark, a NATO ally. In other news overseas, Russia has stepped up its attacks on Ukraine's southern region of Odessa, triggering widespread power outages and putting key port facilities at risk. According to BBC News, Ukrainian officials say the strikes are part of a systematic campaign. Deputy Prime Minister Oleksiy Kuleba warned that the focus of the war may now be shifting toward Odessa. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the repeated attacks appear aimed at cutting off Ukraine's access to the sea and disrupting maritime trade. Earlier this month, Russian President Vladimir Putin threatened to block Ukraine's sea access, accusing Kiev of launching drone attacks on Russian oil tankers linked to Moscow's so-called Shadow Fleet, vessels used to evade Western sanctions. On Sunday night, strikes in the Odessa region cut electricity to about 120,000 people and sparked a fire at a major port, destroying containers of flour and vegetable oil. The attacks follow days of bombardment that have disrupted power supplies and caused casualties. Last week, a missile strike on a port near Odessa killed 8 people and wounded dozens more. And finally, at least 3 people were killed and more than 30 others injured after fighting broke out between Syrian army forces and the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces or SDF in the city of Aleppo on Monday. The clashes come as talks continue on a plan to integrate the SDF into Syria's state institutions under a March agreement that also calls for a nationwide ceasefire. A key deadline under that deal is less than a week away. The CNN reports health officials in Aleppo said civilians were among those killed and wounded, with both sides blaming each other for shelling residential areas. The US-backed SDF said its neighborhoods were hit by mortar and heavy weapon fire from groups linked to the Damascus government. Syrian defense officials meanwhile said their forces were responding to SDF attacks on government-held areas. The SDF is currently the strongest non-state armed force in Syria and controls large areas mainly in the country's northeast. Later in the day, both the Syrian Defense Ministry and the SDF said they had halted attacks on each other, citing ongoing efforts to reduce tensions. And that concludes today's edition of World News in 5. For Radyo Pilipinas World Service, this has been Steph Vicente. Good day and stay safe, everyone.
World News in 5.
Right now.
News and developments making headlines around the world in 5 minutes. World News in 5. Here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service.